In the quiet dawn of the 1940s, a shadow stretched across the globe. War raged, and humanity stood at a precipice, not just of conflict, but of unprecedented scientific advancement. This was a new kind of war, one where victory might not be decided by the number of soldiers, but by the intellectual force of scientists working in secret. Behind closed doors, in laboratories hidden from public view, the greatest minds of a generation worked tirelessly on a secret that would forever alter the course of history: the atomic bomb. This wasn't merely a weapon, it was a fundamental shift in power. A force so immense it promised to end the war, or perhaps all wars. The moral weight was staggering. Every calculation, every experiment, was a step into a terrifying unknown, a domain once reserved for gods, now being unlocked by mortals. Under the intense pressure of a global cataclysm, the genie was being summoned, and no one truly knew if it could ever be put back in the bottle. The project, shrouded in absolute secrecy, was known as the Manhattan Project. It was an undertaking of unimaginable scale, a secret nation within a nation, from the sprawling, purpose-built cities at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, to the plutonium reactors at Hanford, Washington, and culminating in the high-desert laboratory of Los Alamos, New Mexico. Over 100,000 people toiled. Most had no idea what they were building. Secrecy was absolute, enforced by compartmentalization. A physicist might know the properties of an element, but not its purpose. A technician might wire a circuit, but not what it triggered. This vast human and industrial machine ran on a currency of whispered rumors and enforced silence. All of this effort was focused on a single goal, driven by the paralyzing fear that Nazi Germany might get there first. The isolation, particularly at a place like Los Alamos, was profound, creating a pressure cooker environment of genius and paranoia. To deliver this revolutionary weapon, a machine of equally impressive capability was required. The B-29 Superfortress was the answer. It was the most advanced, most expensive bomber of its time, a technological marvel bristling with innovations like a pressurized cabin for high-altitude flight and computer-controlled remote gun turrets. But even this giant had to be modified. A special squadron, under the Silver Plate Project, received B-29s stripped of armor and guns, their bomb bays reconfigured to hold a single, massive, and uniquely shaped payload. These aircraft were more than just planes. They were the chosen vessels for history's most devastating cargo. The crews, like those of the 509th Composite Group, were the best in the Air Force, handpicked for their skill, their discretion, and their ability to operate under a level of pressure no other aviators had ever known. The atomic bomb was not a single, ready-made device, trucked from a factory. It was a complex, handcrafted assembly of intricate components, each designed with meticulous precision. For safety and logistical reasons, these parts were almost always transported separately. The highly unstable conventional explosives, shaped into lenses to trigger the implosion, traveled in one convoy. The precisely machined plutonium core, the physics package that was the heart of the beast, traveled in another, often chaperoned by its own scientists in a humble sedan. The electronic initiators and batteries, the brains of the device, traveled separately still. This method, while cautious, multiplied the risks. It meant more flights, more convoys over rough desert roads, and more opportunities for a simple, tragic accident to intervene and unleash catastrophe. On a moonless night in February 1945, one such B-29 took off from a remote airbase in New Mexico, likely heading for Kirtland Field near Albuquerque, a central hub for the project. Its cargo, vital components of an atomic bomb, a routine but high-stakes transfer. The flight was mundane, or so it was intended to be. The crew, seasoned and professional, had flown countless missions, each one a testament to their skill and courage. They knew their cargo was sensitive, high explosive, top secret. They likely did not know its true, world-ending nature. As the Superfortress, heavy with its secret, climbed into the cold night, it passed over a landscape that was itself a secret, a vast, empty canvas that the military was using to practice for a new kind of war. As the B-29 climbed higher, the weather began to turn. The high desert of New Mexico is a place of extremes, and that night, it showed its menacing side. What started as a clear night gradually transformed into a turbulent one. Winds picked up, shearing across the mountains, and dark clouds gathered, obscuring the stars and challenging the aircraft's stability. High-altitude navigation in 1945 was still a rudimentary art. Inside the cabin, the crew would have felt the sudden, violent lurches. The howl of the wind would have mixed with the drone of the engines, and the airframe itself would have groaned under the immense, invisible stress. A chilling sound in the pressurized darkness. Concern would have quickly turned to active alarm. Then, without warning, disaster struck. It wasn't just the weather. A catastrophic mechanical failure crippled the aircraft. Perhaps it was an engine fire, a runaway propeller, or a critical structural fault exacerbated by the turbulence. One of the B-29's powerful engines faltered, then died, its propeller feathering uselessly. The roar of the engines became a lopsided, desperate drone. The aircraft, now unbalanced and fighting both the storm and its own wounded body, began to lose altitude. In an airplane, especially one as complex as a B-29, failure is a cascade. The loss of one engine puts more strain on the others. Electrical systems might falter. The pilots wrestled with the controls, but the plane was a beast, and it was dying. Despite the crew's valiant efforts to save the aircraft, the damage was too severe. The B-29, heavy with its unique payload, spiraled out of control. It plunged from the dark sky and slammed into the unforgiving New Mexico desert near the town of Vaughn. The impact was devastating. A flash of exploding fuel lit the horizon for a fraction of a second. A silent, terrible bloom, followed by the terrible sound of metal tearing and disintegrating. The plane, a symbol of American technological might, was reduced to a smoking, twisted ruin, scattering debris across a wide, dark, and desolate area, miles from any road. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the high-pitched shriek of the wind and the crackling of spreading fires among the scrub brush. In the immediate aftermath, a desperate scramble began. Back at the airbase, the plane's signal vanished from the board, radio silence. This wasn't just a missing plane. It was a broken arrow scenario, the military's worst nightmare, before the term even existed. Panic, cold and professional, set in at the command center. A protocol that had only been theorized was now active. Specialized military, police, and ordnance teams were scrambled, their orders superseding all other traffic. Their primary concern was not just the crew, but the cargo. The components of an atomic bomb lay exposed amidst the twisted metal. The first responders, racing into the darkness, were heading not just to a crash, but to a potential national catastrophe that could derail the entire war effort. The real, immediate danger wasn't a full nuclear explosion. A nuclear detonation required a precise, complex, and simultaneous sequence of events that a crash could never replicate. The true nightmare was something else. The bomb's components included a large amount of conventional high explosives. The lenses meant to compress the plutonium core. If these explosives detonated in the fire, they would act as a dirty bomb. The plutonium core, one of the most toxic substances known to man, would be pulverized and aerosolized. A single inhaled particle could be a fatal dose. This invisible cloud of radioactive material would poison the landscape for centuries, rendering a vast swath of New Mexico uninhabitable. It would be a self-inflicted nuclear disaster on American soil. A specialized team, likely from the 27th Ordnance Service Company based at Kirtland, was dispatched to the crash site. These were men trained for unimaginable contingencies. They arrived at a scene of utter chaos, a dark, cold, debris-strewn field, lit only by their flashlights and the dying embers of the wreck. The howling wind threatened to spread any potential contamination. They would have donned whatever primitive breathing gear they had, carrying heavy, lead-lined containers and early model Geiger counters. They worked with frantic urgency, navigating the treacherous wreckage. Every piece of twisted metal was a potential hazard. It was a race against time, against the elements, and against the invisible poison of the very technology they had all helped to create. With incredible skill and bravery, the team began the painstaking search. This was not like clearing unexploded ordnance. This was new and infinitely more sinister. They weren't just looking for a bomb. They were looking for pieces, the initiator, the high explosive lenses, and most importantly, the plutonium core, the deadly heart of the weapon, working by flashlight. They meticulously sifted through the wreckage, handling each suspect piece with a reverence born of terror. They knew, or at least suspected, the devastating potential they held. The process was slow, painstaking, and fraught with peril, but their dedication was unwavering. Finally, they located the key components. Miraculously, the conventional explosives had not detonated, and the plutonium core, while damaged, was intact. Piece by piece, the threat was contained. As the first gray light of dawn broke over the New Mexico desert, the full, terrible scale of the wreckage became clear. The immediate crisis was averted. The conventional explosives had not detonated. The highly radioactive material remained contained. The U.S. had narrowly, and by sheer luck, escaped a self-inflicted nuclear disaster on its own soil. The exhausted ordnance team, their faces black with soot and etched with fatigue, could finally breathe. But the sense of relief was mixed with a chilling realization. The margin for error in this new atomic world was non-existent. They had stared into the abyss, and what they saw would haunt them. The silent what-if of that night would become a permanent, unspoken part of the project. The incident, like so many others related to the Manhattan Project, was immediately and completely classified. The crash site was sanitized, every last bolt and scrap of metal collected. The wreckage was buried, and the ground itself likely tested and remediated in secret. A cover story was fabricated, a routine training mission gone wrong. All personnel involved were debriefed and forced to sign oaths of secrecy, binding them for life under threat of treason. The crash near Vaughn, New Mexico, was buried under layers of top-secret stamps, erased from the official record. It became one of the first, most dangerous secrets of the new nuclear age, setting a precedent for a new kind of government secrecy, one that would shroud the atomic enterprise for decades to come. The crash in New Mexico was a stark and terrifying reminder. Even before the atomic bomb was unleashed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, its very existence carried an unseen cost, an inherent, catastrophic danger. It was a story of human ingenuity and human fallibility, of technological hubris and sheer, blind luck. The incident proved that the greatest threat might not be the enemy, but the awesome, terrible power that humanity had unlocked, a power it could barely control. The night the U.S. almost nuked itself was a forgotten echo, a silent prelude to the profound and terrifying responsibility that would define the atomic age. It was an age where a single mechanical failure, a single patch of bad weather, could lead to the end of everything. It was the first of many broken arrows, a clear warning that in the atomic game, the house itself was always at risk.